Good morning, everybody. Here I am, absolutely on it, as always, and raring to go. Everything you need to know about anxiety. My anxiety levels right now are quite high. I feel an increase in pulse. I feel the sweatiness of my hands. And now I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation with you and tell you all about it. There we go. Anxiety. There we go. So I am going to share with you the 10 key things I've learned about anxiety. So you can get excited about what's coming up. I have made them into a lovely little list for you. So number one, some of the seemingly most confident warrior-like folk suffer from chronic anxiety. And some of them are on this Zoom. We all feel fear. It's a hardwired way of keeping ourselves safe. Fear and adrenaline cause the fight or flight response. Fear can often manifest as anger as a way to use the adrenaline if fighting or fleeing is not an option. When we suffer adrenaline-fueled anger, we're usually oblivious to the fear trigger. Anxiety is caused by excess adrenaline. I'm going to say that one again because that is the absolute key to the whole process. Anxiety is caused by excess adrenaline. And I might make you say that with me a little bit later on because it's going to be a little bit panto-esque, some of this. Excess adrenaline can cause a wide range of very unpleasant physical symptoms. Our brains can take conscious control of adrenaline output to reduce our anxiety. Our brains can transform debilitating, anxiety-inducing levels of adrenaline into motivational rocket fuel. And finally, laughing instantly lowers adrenaline. So I'm going to go back, if I haven't messed this up, which I have. So let's do that and then try that again, to the first four while I burble on a bit. So as I said in my blurb about this event, I never saw myself as an anxious person because I had a fixed idea of how someone with anxiety would present to the world, i.e. shy, mousy, shrinking into the background, and that really isn't me. Also, anxious people are fearful, and we're taught from a very young age that being afraid is bad, it's weak and frowned upon by society. Think about the negative language of our childhoods, especially in Britain. Cowdy, cowdy, castard, yellow belly, scaredy cat, spineless, wuss, wimp, loser, and their counterparts. Put on a brave face, stiff up a lip, boys don't cry, big girls don't cry, get some backbone. For me, to refuse a dare as a kid was almost unthinkable. In fact, I'm not sure that has changed and is shamelessly exploited by my stepchildren. Well, Tony shakes his head in despair. In our society, it is shameful to admit to feeling afraid. And so we don't. We tend to keep quiet about it. And some of us don't even admit it to ourselves. Although we've made fear more palatable by repackaging it, rebranding it as stress or anxiety. And under those guises, it is acceptable to talk about, interestingly. But fear, which is basically what we're talking about, is the most fundamental of all human emotions. We all experience it because it keeps us safe. It stops us taking foolhardy risks. Even I would think twice about jumping off a cliff just because the kids had dared me to. Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about managing that fear to allow you to do what needs to be done, whether that's giving a presentation on Zoom or running into a burning building to rescue a loved one. Now, in 2017, I met, interviewed, and attended a lecture by Dean Burnett, a highly entertaining neuroscientist and columnist for The Guardian. Totally infatuated by the man and everything he had to say, I read his first book, The Idiot Brain, which looks at how, within our vastly complex and often unfathomably brilliant brains sits the amygdala. Unchanged since our days as cave dwellers fending off saber-toothed tigers, the amygdala finds the contemporary world bewildering. One of its primary functions is to continually assess sensory input at a deeply unconscious level and to alert our prefrontal cortex, where high-functioning thinking happens, if it senses danger. If the prefrontal cortex agrees, we feel fear and our body is flooded with adrenaline, preparing us to either do battle or run away. We commonly know this as the fight or flight mechanism. Imagine transporting your cave-dwelling ancestor to the 21st century. They would detect threat everywhere. Their sensory input would be constantly screaming danger. But luckily, they would have a very sensible prefrontal cortex with them to give reassurance. If we're standing by the road and a car is coming, the amygdala senses this as a huge threat. The prefrontal cortex acknowledges that stepping into the road in front of it would be dangerous, but that standing on the pavement and waiting for it to pass is totally safe. And the amygdala is happy and doesn't release adrenaline ready for fighting or fleeing, and we calmly wait until the road is clear before crossing. If, however, you have previously been knocked down by a car mounting the pavement, waiting to cross a busy road will trigger the memory of that occasion, and your body will react as if it were about to happen again, i.e., it would flood you with adrenaline and a sense of terror, even though rationally the prefrontal cortex knows the chances of the same thing happening again are very slim. This fundamentally is the essence of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, sometimes there's a genuine ongoing fear that the prefrontal cortex acknowledges but can't resolve, like the coronavirus, for example. Just want to qualify here, many life experiences pre-COVID also fit this model. In other words, other causes of anxiety disorder are available. But back to the case of the current COVID-19 pandemic, which we're all very aware of. We have been bombarded with scary information, statistics, and experiences that pose a very real threat. Any virus would have been a very real danger to our primitive forebears too. And so the prefrontal cortex and amygdala are in total agreement. There is something to fear. So the amygdala releases adrenaline, but it has no job to do. We can't run from or deploy our karate moves against a virus. Instead, the adrenaline sits in our system. And as the impact of COVID has been relentless for nearly 2 years now, the amygdala has been keeping our systems topped up with unhelpful adrenaline. The body then learns to expect that certain level of adrenaline. And before we know where we are, we have a baseline of anxiety that when we're faced with any additional perceived threats, spikes to intolerable levels. In other words, we have developed an anxiety disorder. This explains why so many people are struggling to get back to normal. We've learned that our home is the safest place to be, and we're already wired to regard home as safe. Obviously, there are exceptions to that. Some homes are most definitely not safe, but as a general rule, our homes have become our safe zone. So why would we want to go out into a world that is full of danger? It has always been full of danger. It's been full of the opportunity to make a fool of yourself, to get run over, and now to catch COVID. So let's move on to the second part of that list so you can look at that while I'm burbling on a bit more. So early last year, I made a video that I circulated on Facebook explaining how if we can't fight or flee, we tend to get angry, especially with those around us, or we work really hard to contain that anger, pushing it down inside where it moulders and turns into depression. I predicted a rise in domestic violence and the possibility of riots if people didn't learn to recognize the fear behind their anger and find a way to diffuse it. It gives me absolutely no pleasure at all to have been right in my predictions. Instead, I am deeply frustrated that at that time, I didn't have the next piece of the jigsaw puzzle, the key to how we can take control of our adrenaline levels. As many of you know, Tony and I have recently moved to Manchester and been joined by Tony's 14-year-old son, while his 17-year-old remains in Bedford with their mum and stepdad. Earlier this year, both kids began talking to us about their anxiety and how and why it was manifesting. They are, of course, Gen Z and very woke, and so totally in touch with all of this kind of stuff in a way that my generation never was. Without going into detail, they had experienced a very strict lockdown with a stepdad in his 70s and not in great health, whose own anxiety levels were through the roof. We wanted to give both kids help to manage their anxiety, and so signed up with an organisation that has just rebranded as the KAD Solution, where KAD stands for Kids Anxiety Disorder. They include the whole family in the programme to manage the child's anxiety, and it is through working that I have come to fully understand how much of a part anxiety plays in my life and has done since childhood. More importantly, it's given me some techniques to manage my anxiety, or other words, lower my adrenaline levels. So the first key concept to grasp and accept, and the reason for everything I've said up to now, is that anxiety is not a mental health issue. It's a physical response to too much adrenaline. Anxiety is not a mental health condition. Anxiety is a physiological condition. Anxiety is the presence of unused adrenaline in our bodies. That is, the course spends 4 weeks hammering that home. So I've done it twice. It's really important, obviously, because they spend 4 weeks on it, to take on board these 3 facts, because once you do, then you can accept that it's possible for us to take control and to reduce our own anxiety. And I'll come on to how to do that in a little while. But let's have a quick look at some of the ways that anxiety manifests in our bodies. IBS, a diagnosis of last resort. Doctors will diagnose IBS once they have done all the tests to eliminate anything else. IBS is horrible, but it's part of the excess adrenaline. The body wants to expel anything that's unnecessary, that's going to hinder it when it's running away or fighting, and therefore stomach issues, bowel issues, things that are horrible and potentially embarrassing, especially for teenagers, are again caused by excess adrenaline. Migraines and headaches, panic attacks, insomnia, racing heart, obsessive thoughts, thinking over and over and over again about the things that are worrying us, sore eyes, chronic fatigue, acute and sensitive hearing, derealization, in other words, sort of zoning out, not being present in the moment, health fears, getting paranoid about things that might happen in the future, elevated sense of dread, just finding things frightening that are not frightening for most people, suicidal thoughts, aggression and anger, inability to concentrate because your body is primed for fight or flight. It's not primed for sitting and listening to a Zoom lecture. And loss of libido, fairly obviously, when you're about to fight or flee, you don't want to be thinking about sex. So that mechanism is shut down in the brain. I have got much more information about each of these, which I could supply as a handout in the hub if people are interested. But it's not just the symptoms of why you're suffering from anxiety that are horrendous. Yes, excess adrenaline makes us feel yuck, but the residue of getting over anxiety can leave you with a lot of things that you have used as coping strategies. So OCD type things, constantly going back, worrying that you haven't locked the door or closed the door or turned the hob off, excessive washing of hands or showering or whatever, because you're afraid of germs or bacteria, and this is something you feel that these are things that you do to give yourself a feeling that you are controlling the threat in your environment. The same with the self-harming and eating disorders, particularly anorexia, and the one that I can never remember the TUDAR for, which is ARFID, avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is all about control. It's about taking control of something and saying, no, I'm not eating that. I can exert great self-discipline in my life and misguidedly feel that that is restoring some kind of equilibrium within the messed up levels of adrenaline in your body. And self-harming, for anybody who suffers chronic pain, you will understand that sometimes if you've got a dull ache, so my joints, for example, if my elbow is dull aching, I might stretch it or twist it to give an intense pain, because a little bit like the expression, banging your head against a brick wall is great because it's so much better when you stop. But giving the intense pain is a relief from the constant gnawing ache. And then when you stop, it's like, oh, there's that lovely gnawing ache that I now love because it's better than the intense pain I've just inflicted on myself. Self-harming is a similar mechanism. When you're feeling horrible and angry and frustrated and out of control and afraid, and then cutting, it's a sense of control. It's you taking and creating a pain that is of your making, that you have control over. Agoraphobia, we've talked about not wanting to leave the house because it's your safe place, and how the brain is already hardwired to regard the home as a safe place, and how easy it could be when everything is scary to not want to leave your safe place, not want to set foot outside the front door. And phobias can be created by the just pure act of having anxiety. If you are always in the same room when you have a massive attack of anxiety, or if you are always holding the same cup, or if you have a massive anxiety attack eating a certain piece of food, you can transfer all of that negative feeling onto the place or the object or the food or a person. And one of the families that has been working the program, the dad became an object of phobia for the daughter, because he was always there when she had night terrors, always there trying to make her feel better, trying to comfort her. She began to associate him with the fear and the terror, and therefore she would get the same response when she saw him, and so she couldn't be in the same room as him. Obviously, that's incredibly traumatic for the dad, but they'd been unpicking that behaviour and working on it, and she was beginning to reform a relationship with her father. But yeah, when the brain gets messed up, it can trigger some awful, supposedly positive behaviors to try and compensate for how bad it's feeling. Once you've got your adrenaline under control, you might be left with some of these, but you can then deploy your rational brain to unpick those as well. So when you no longer have adrenaline interfering in everything, you can go, no, I do not need to go home and check that I locked the door. And yeah, it's all about your brain taking control and improving behavior from destructive to constructive. Right, so I've finished all of that without actually really looking at anything on that piece of paper, which is quite good. So, right, going back to here, once we have learned to control our adrenaline levels, we could be left with one or several of these behaviors, but now we understand their origin and the mechanics behind them, we can work to rid them and make ourselves better. We can reverse all the yuck with the power of our brains. Oh no, I hear you crying. Jane's going to go all hippie, happy, clappy on us. Wrong. I am actually going to get a little bit sciencey. So we have, over the last couple of decades, come across things that use our brains to make changes in our behaviour and our life for the better. Now, you may be dubious about the effect of neurolinguistic programming. You might not be totally convinced about neuroplasticity, the flexibility of the brain to change and morph and for us to become a different person who behaves in a different way. But there is so much evidence to back up the effectiveness of the placebo effect that you cannot possibly deny that. The brain can be fooled into making us better just by being told that it's got a little bit of help. Now, when we're talking about the brain making the brain better, it's one bit of brain talking to another bit of brain. It's not like we're telling the brain that we're taking a pill to make the gout in our big toe better, and the brain has to sort of communicate all the way down to our foot to make the gout better, despite the fact we're not taking a pill. We're getting the brain to talk to itself fundamentally. And that's what neuroplasticity, neurolinguistic programming is all about. And the placebo effect underlines how powerful our brain can be in the process of healing. So I'm sure you're all now completely convinced by that, but I also hear you huff. Ugh, can't I just take some pills or go and chat to a therapist? And the answer to that is no. Why doesn't talking about it help? Well, I'm a big fan of pills where they are appropriate, and I'm an even bigger fan of talk therapy, helping to unpack the origin of behaviours and how to rectify them can be really, really useful. But in the case of anxiety, talking about the things that are worrying you doesn't help. Yeah, I really struggled with this. I struggled with it a lot, especially as I was just beginning to open up, share my worries with Tony instead of bottling them up. And I thought this was a really good thing and most praiseworthy. So it took me a long while and a lot of reading and thinking to unpick this and figure out what exactly they were getting at when they said that talking about your worries doesn't help. And these are the conclusions that I came to. There are some worries that need to be talked through because another person can bring a fresh perspective and help you to find a solution. Solution is the key here. If talking to somebody is going to help you do something to eliminate the worry, then it's a positive thing. For example, our unlocking sessions on Fridays at the moment, where people bring their manuscript and put something that's problematic for them to a group. And that works really, really well because they go away buzzing with enthusiasm and motivation and head off to change their manuscript for the better. And that particular talking about a worry has been very productive. If, however, they came back week after week with the same or very similar niggles about their manuscripts, that would not be helpful. It would not be helpful because they're not looking for a genuine solution, because they're not taking responsibility for going away and fixing their manuscript. What they're looking for is for reassurance from the group that they are a good writer and that their manuscript is great. What they actually receiving is validation of their worries by everybody having a response repeatedly that's telling them that actually the problem that they've got with their manuscript is a genuine problem and really almost insurmountably genuine problem because everybody's got opinions about it constantly. But nobody has actually stepped up and solved it. which is really selfish of us because, you know, none of us have gone, oh, let's write that book for you, because we're kind of mean like that. So what they have done is build those problems into gargantuan proportions and increase their anxiety, not lowered it. Now that's an example for us because we're writers and something that we do, but that model applies to talking about all sorts of worries. If you can't talk to somebody, get a fresh perspective which helps you to solve it, then talking about it over and over and over again just gives it power. It gives it, it puts it in a place of greater significance than it needs to be. So, and something similar happens when you repeatedly talk about a traumatic incident, because every time you do so, your body goes through all those horrific emotions and releases all the same chemicals as if it were actually happening again. Go back to our person on the pavement who has once been knocked down by a car. Standing on the pavement is a trigger. It makes them relive that experience. But if they talked about that experience, they would also be reliving it. They would also be having raised adrenaline levels, and they would be making themselves more anxious. And flooding their system with adrenaline. So let's recap about why talking doesn't help. Come on, there we go. You relive the experience with all the physiological symptoms. You give the worry the validity of other people's reactions, and you end up frustrated because no one has the magic wand you need them to have to make everything right. The same effect occurs just from thinking about something traumatic or stressful. Think about something right now. So this is audience participation. Think about something that makes you angry. Go on, do it now. Feel your adrenaline levels rise. Personally, I find other people's selfishness or Boris Johnson light the blue touch paper quite effectively. Has your pulse increased? Maybe you're already producing extra stomach acid, or your hands are going clammy. Now, tell yourself in whatever way works for you that there is no immediate threat. My mantra is, this is not a saber-toothed tiger. You should find you're feeling a little calmer. And if not, you will with practice. Because this is your prefrontal cortex consciously giving the amygdala the same message it gives repeatedly on an unconscious level. If we finished now and I left you all with your anger-inducing thoughts and you continued to dwell on them, going over and over, government cock-ups or the thoughtlessness of your spouse, boss, kids, siblings, etc., then your anxiety indicators would all begin to kick in under the guise of anger and frustration until you stop that thought process or you do something else. So now we have covered 3 ways of controlling your adrenaline levels. What are the first 3 steps to recovery? Come along. There we go. Reassure your amygdala and make sure that, I haven't put this down, but I was thinking about this last night. The brain doesn't understand don't. So if I say to you now, don't think about a pink elephant, you're going to think about a pink elephant because I've planted the idea of the pink elephant and the brain's completely ignored don't. So when you're self-motivating yourself, always go with positive statements. So telling your amygdala, don't be scared, is counterproductive because it's all your amygdala is going to hear is be scared. So possibly my mantra, this is not a saber-toothed tiger, is suboptimal, but reassure your amygdala using positive statement. You are totally safe. This is a totally safe environment. This is not going to kill. Our life is not in jeopardy. Oh God, it's hard because we use negatives all the time, but try and reassure your amygdala, finding a positive mantra, which I'm now going to have to think of. Stop talking about how you feel. Stop talking about the things that make you anxious. Stop thinking about the things that make you anxious. Now, those last two sound really easy. Just stop thinking about it. That's as simple as that. And obviously, that is much easier said than done. So don't but give your anxiety more power by giving it the attention it craves. And the way to do this most effectively is to distract yourself. And you can do that in a variety of ways. If you're left alone with your own thoughts, as a lot of us are, and you find that you're going over and over and over something that's worrying you, my go-to is sticking on an audiobook. Somebody else's words fill my head. I don't have room for obsessive thoughts. Or maybe listen to the radio, or speak to a friend, but speak to a friend about, what was on telly last night, or something trivial, or put some music on and sing to the music, or have a bit of a dance, or both. Those are the kind of things that will distract you away from letting you dwell on your worries and have those adrenaline levels rise and make you feel generally yucky. Diddly dee, diddly 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 dee. If you can find something that makes you laugh, like talking to a friend who's a bit of a nutcase, then that's the best thing. Because laughter, and we'll come on to this again a little bit later, is absolutely the best medicine for anxiety and for lowering adrenaline levels. Now, I'm afraid I'm now going to talk about being an adult, and this is where some people might say that I'm straying into an area that I genuinely know nothing about. So to those people, I would just like to say, and that's you, Annalise Avery. In all seriousness, a lot of us are writers for young people, and we are more than averagely in touch with our inner children. But that doesn't mean that we aren't capable of dragging our adult kicking and screaming to the foreground of our consciousness when necessary. And there is a branch of psychology that has grown up from Freud's original theory of the id, the ego, and the superego that suggests that we are all constantly operating in one of three states: the child, the adult, and the parent. And the parent is split into two. Obviously, the child, we'll come to that in a minute. The child is all about fun. It's about pleasure, it's about instant gratification, but it's also the part of us that wants someone else to fix it, who wants another adult to come along and solve our problems, to reassure us that everything is going to be okay, and to tuck us into bed and read us a story. It's okay to be in child sometimes, because playing and being silly and having fun are all excellent for lowering adrenaline levels and promoting good general mental health. But we need our own inner adult to step up and take responsibility for the serious stuff. Now, our parent, as I just said, comes in two forms. We have the critical parent and the nurturing parent. Now, as writers, we recognise the critical parent as the voice of self-doubt. It's that editor on the shoulder that's never satisfied with what you've written. A lot of us, I think, find it more difficult to access our nurturing parent, and it's our nurturing parent that we need right now. We need to tell our critical parent to basically bog off. Our nurturing parent is our cheerleader. It's the voice that tells us we're doing fine and everything is gonna be peachy. I'm not sure why my nurturing parent is American, but I'm not in a position to argue with her. These three aspects of ourselves are very important for managing our recovery from anxiety. Your nurturing parent in the prefrontal cortex needs to reassure your child in the amygdala that you as a unified whole are safe. Your prefrontal cortex child needs to stop trying to lean on outsiders and hand the role of saviour to our adult, who in turn can ask the nurturing parent for help to distract them from worrying. I absolutely love this model because I've always had three voices in my head debating stuff. And when I learned about this, I realised that it was that I was actually healthy and not one step away from being dragged off by the men in white coats. So now I've looked at the internal roles of the child, adult, and parent, and how they operate in our heads, but they also manifest in the way that we interact with other people. So if we allow our critical parent to constantly be talking to our husband like a naughty child, he will end up behaving like one, and he will react back in child. And that's how a lot of arguments between couples start. It's how a lot of arguments between teenagers and parents start. It's that disparity of what's the word I'm looking for? Power. So if you talk to somebody and try and put them in a position of low power, then they're going to come back and try and fight you for the power. What you really need to be doing is talking adults to adults with your spouse and with your teenager. If your teenager is blossoming into an adult, the best way to communicate with them is adult to adult. And as parents, we quite often want to talk to our teenagers as if they were still children, and that's where they get resentful and frustrated and exasperated with us. But also we need to stop being in child as well. So quite often our inner child will escape and behave very badly. So if we're not treating our husband like he's a naughty child, we might be trying to lean on him by having childish tantrums, shouting, being aggressive, hiding away, sulking, or attention seeking. These are all childish behaviours. That is us stamping our feet and saying, we need you to help us, we need rescuing. There is a similar model which is also three component parts, which is the persecutor, the victim, and the rescuer, which kind of is similar, that we are all either in one. So if you are persecuting somebody, they have the choice of either rescuing you or being a victim. And then those roles within social dynamics change and shift. I love psychology. I find I could talk to you about psychology stuff for hours, and it actually seems like I probably am. So we need to keep our inner child in its place. There is a place for inner child, and it is in writing children's books and playing. It is not in trying to deal with the scary bits of the world, the responsible bits, the adult bits, the bits that need us to step up and take responsibility. So our fourth step to recovery is to find our inner adult and put them in charge. Give yourself the respect that you deserve, because anxiety can so easily strip us of our feelings of self-worth. Slow down your speech and your movements. Be aware of when you start to speed up, because that's usually indicates that you're slipping into child mode. And the next step will be old destructive behavior. So every time your inner adult and nurturing parent give you reassurance and divert your attention away from your anxiety, you are gaining power over your body and your life. How awesome is that? So we've looked at the negative effects of adrenaline and how it can make the body feel absolutely awful. But once we can control it, adrenaline can be put to amazingly good use. Elvis Presley used to have his concert trailer parked an exact distance away from the stage to give him a 25-minute walk, which was, for him, was the perfect amount of time to harness his adrenaline and turn it into energy by telling his amygdala that the amygdala wasn't in charge here, he was in charge. His prefrontal cortex was in charge. Similarly, Judi Dench talks about the adrenaline before a performance as being petrol for her performance. I need a little bit of adrenaline to get out of bed in the morning, a little bit of adrenaline that generates a bit of excitement for the day, which is highly motivating. And also, because with adrenaline you release cortisol, which is body's natural anti-inflammatory, it helps my creaky joints. I also discovered that one of the reasons that I tend to be running late for things. When I used to run a radio show, I would arrive just in the nick of time. And by putting myself under that time pressure, I kicked my adrenaline in, and that got me through the nerves, if you like, of doing the live performance. It gave me, as Judi Dench says, the petrol to be live on radio and be entertaining and witty and all the things that I needed to do. So as with everything in life, we need to get the balance right, and the balance is difficult. But if you are suffering from anxiety, you want to get rid of your adrenaline before you start trying to use it in a controlled way. So there's your balance, there's your scales, and that's my last slide. So my 10th top tip was that laughter is a great way to lower adrenaline levels. And so I'm going to finish with a couple of bits of audience participation. So I'd like you to put your microphones on, please. And your cameras, ideally, as well. In fact, I'm going to stop screen sharing so that we can all see each other. So a really quick way to relax if you're feeling is to take in a deep breath. Take in a deep breath for the count of 5 and then let it out for the count of 7. So let's do that together now. You should find that you don't collapse into a coughing fit, fratters, but what you actually do is find that your muscles begin to automatically relax, because what you've done is mirrored what the body would do after it's been fighting or fleeing, and it's now okay, it's safe to relax, and you can go, ah. So breathing out for longer than you've breathed in tells the muscles it's okay to relax now. And actually, I find that a really good, quick technique, and there's science behind that. Now, the other thing is that if you're feeling a bit flat, you need to just give yourself a bit of a boost. Again, take a deep breath, and as you release it, you start off with a very low rumbling, the lowest rumbling note that you can find. And as you breathe out, you get higher and higher and higher and higher. So I'm going to demonstrate for you. So it goes something like this. So now it's your turn. Everybody, with me, here we go. Take a deep breath. Now, all the people who were on screen and did that are now smiling and laughing, and you've instantly, well, I don't know what the science behind it is, because nobody told me, but I do know it works. And one of the reasons it works is because it's so ridiculous, it makes you either, at the very least, smile and probably laugh. So there you go. I've given you as many top tips as I can to help you control your anxiety and understand it a bit better. So I guess we're now on questions. Blimey, that was, oh no, I've got 10 minutes. That's quite good, actually. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions? Did I go through that too quickly?
That was good.
Yeah, I've heard that parent and critical child and all that stuff. I've heard that before, and it's really true, isn't it? Because the way
it really is, yeah.
Reflected back at you.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that all sounds really, really simple, but it's quite difficult to implement because it means you've got to have your prefrontal cortex taking awareness. What if you can't talk about what worries you? Well, you see, that's the thing, isn't it? Because I always thought, oh, you know, I developed a protective, I can't talk to my parents about what worries me because I don't want them to worry as well. So I thought I was doing really well when I was, you know, sharing my worries with Tony. So I understand what it's like to not be able to share your worries. And I think that's a different thing because you're then going to be probably obsessing about your worries in your own head. So I think it's up to you to define whether your worries are something that would benefit from the insight from somebody else, in which case you need to find your inner adult and get them to have a adult conversation about what's worrying you, or you need to acknowledge that actually they are worries that you need distracting from, and implement distraction techniques to stop yourself from the obsessive thoughts that just keep going on and on.
I found that really useful, Jane, that distinction, because I've been suffering a lot of anxiety just recently, and it's the kind of health one, and I know that I'm obsessing. I've got a stinky cold at the moment, so that doesn't help, but I've been obsessing about am I going to be okay, to the point that it's not really that rational, and I know it's partly connected to what you were saying about the COVID effect and living on my own, being on my own, and also because I'm widowed and my husband died very suddenly. I've got that oh my God, I've got a pain in I'm going to have a heart attack, you know, and I had to look up, you know, well, no, actually, if there's a slight little twinge here, it's probably because you were just outside lifting horse feed bags and you pulled a muscle, you know, get a grip, woman. But I think it's a really good example, I think, because it's pointless me worrying all the time about, am I well? I know I'm well, you know, I'm just worrying and constantly thinking about it. It's causing me loads of stress. But I think there's and so if I was constantly talking to people about that, I'd just be feeding that stress.
Yeah.
That's where I think the distraction is really important. But then I was thinking back to when you experience kind of trauma. So when Roger first died, I, of course, spent several weeks just talking about it because you're coming to terms with it. Yeah. So I think for me, it's
yeah, I think
exactly what you say now. If I tell the story again now about how he died, I just traumatize myself. So yeah. there's a point at which you've got to say, right, I've done that processing. I've got to stop doing that now. I've got to stop thinking about it. I think it was incredibly helpful, that thing that you said about knowing when you need to share, either to process or to get some help, and knowing when actually it's not helping anymore. It's just winding you up.
Yeah, and that's quite hard. It's quite hard to spot that turning point. And then bereavement is classic because, yeah, I mean, my friend Nikki died almost a year ago, and I think about that time. I don't talk about it, but I do think about that night in the hospital more often than is good for me. And I was sitting thinking, well, so why do I do that? Because it doesn't make me feel good. It's not a tribute to Nikki. And then I think there was a part of me that thought, well, I owe it to her to not let that memory die. But actually, no, she'd much rather that I spent that time thinking about one of the times we went out and did something ridiculous and had a good time together. And bereavement is so hard. It's so hard to support other people through as well, because there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can really say to make it any better. And so if you're feeling, you know, you're feeling up, yes, you need to process that immediate thing, and that's but then you know, you can, I quite often find that I don't really start to grieve until at least 6 months after somebody close has died, because my body in the first instance, everything shuts down. So Nikki died at the beginning of December. We had the funeral, we had Christmas, which I remember very little about. And then I obsessed with the conference through the whole of January and just did not allow myself any time to think about anything else particularly. But there's nothing you can say other than I am sad because somebody died.
Yeah, in a way, it's a kind of it's the best example of that in a way, because there is nothing you can do.
No.
So to focus on it is just, but it just made me think of those two things: me worrying about my health because I'm on my own, and when it's just not rational, and then but it's knowing that difference, isn't it? When somebody else can help, and when you're just kind of, I don't know. It's kind of like a verbal diarrhea, isn't it? I'm going to worry about this. And it becomes part of your identity sometimes, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And when you're really suffering from anxiety disorder, Jan's asking really difficult questions. You become your anxiety disorder, and that's all you can talk about, and that's when you need to do distraction. When does distraction become avoidance? Oh,
I've got a view on that.
Go on, Catherine.
Yeah, I think it becomes avoidance if it's counterproductive to you making progress, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if by avoiding something you're not resolving it or getting better or whatever, then it's counterproductive.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I hope you answered the question, but it's something like that, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I was going to say if by confronting it you could find a solution and implement a strategy to solve the problem, then it's avoidance rather than distraction. So I too obsess about my health. There are things I can do. There's no point in me worrying about certain aspects of my health unless I'm prepared to step up and actually take action to improve my health. There are other bits that I have absolutely no control over whatsoever, and there's no point in thinking about those because I can't do anything about them. So to use an Americanism, and excuse the language, it tends to be that shit or get off the pot type scenario. So either start to do something to make things better, or distract yourself from thinking about it, because that sort of mid ground of just going is where you get anxiety, and then the anxiety just makes everything worse. All the things that were bad in the first place are compounded by the actual anxiety itself. And yeah, I think, does that help, Jan?
Oh yeah. No, I think it's very, very interesting. Obviously, I ask because I'm an overthinker, and that's part of my problem. But what you were saying about you being able to switch it off, I have one very small trivial example of what you're saying actually working, and not to lessen anybody else's experience at all, but and it is very small and trivial. It's when I was a child, we'd gone on one family holiday and I'd left all my bags on the train, and as a child I was very worried about that, and I can very distinctly remember sitting on my bed thinking, what am I going to do if I don't get my stuff back? Obviously it'll all be fine, but as a child I was really worried about that, and I distinctly remember telling myself, you cannot do anything about it, so stop worrying. And I did. And it sounds so simple and trivial, but that feeling has remained with me for hundreds of years, and so, yeah. But yes, it does work, what you're saying. So obviously it was a very small, trivial example, but
yeah, but ultimately that's, we start with small things. Right, I need to look at the chat to see if I've missed anything, which I probably have.
Jan, I don't think leaving all your stuff behind on a train is small and trivia. I'd be like, oh my God, do I make it's like I when we went on the writing retreat, I didn't bring a notebook with me or like a pencil case, and I totally regretted that.
Yeah, goodness me.
You
So
know,
like the time
Tigers
when we
did
went
nothing on that, did they?
the time when we went to Seven Stories, Jane, and I
You
actually
haven't
left
got your
the
bag. Oh
backpack.
yeah, I remember. It's exactly what I was thinking about when Jan was saying
Mm.
about that. I thought, oh gosh, yes.
I was completely lost about my backpack for like 2 days. Had everything
Well,
in it.
that's the nature of worry, isn't it? We kind of there are things that are worrying us, but the things that we can worry about, then we do, which are sometimes the small things, because other things are too big. And yeah, it's really interesting, Jane, very helpful. But thank you.
Good, you're all very welcome. Is there anything else anybody else would like to say? Otherwise, we will wind up and go and have lunch.
Just thank you very much, Jane. It was really interesting and informative.
Thank you very much. Right, yes, thank you all for coming along. And the recording will be available. And does anybody want any of their personal bit at the end there cutting out? Because I can edit. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to know I was an idiot and didn't take the notebook
Well,
with me.
everybody knows you're an idiot, Annalise, so that's fine,
That's
it's no
fine.
biggie.
I did have my iPad with my Apple Pencil, and I thought right, this is an opportunity to just use that, and no, I hated it. So
That's a lot better than forgetting to take all your pants away on holiday, which nobody I know's done that.
you can always buy more pants though, can't you?
You're not if you're camping,
Oh,
not on a school trip with 30 children.
okay.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. You could always have bought more notebooks, Annalise, and
I did.
and
Of course I did.
good opportunity, good excuse.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't it? It's a good excuse to do that.
Here it is.